everyone, and you're all very welcome to today's Client Experience Programme webinar on demystifying what being commercial means as an in-house lawyer. As you know, the focus of this programme is on providing practical insights and learnings to some of the biggest issues and challenges facing in-house legal teams around the world. We're really keen that you get the most from this session. Drop us a note in the chat, leave us any questions you might have or observations as you move through today's content. Connect with each other and indeed with our speakers. That's what today's session and this community is all about. Today's topic is an exciting one, and it's really centered on the evolving role and growing influence the General Counsel and in-house legal teams are having on the strategic direction and leadership of their organizations. Given the importance of the topic, it's important we bring you the latest thinking and proven experience. With that in mind, I'm delighted to hand you over to two former General Counsel, my colleague Kelly Fair, partner at Dentons, and Dan Kane, founder of O-Shaped, to lead you through today's session. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you, Niamh, and hi everyone. Thanks for having me. And I work quite closely with Dentons. O-Shaped and Dentons have worked together very closely for several months now, so it's great to be able to share a bit more about what we're doing together. And you know, for me as now founder of an organisation that's gaining big traction in the UK and now gradually further afield, it's a real pleasure to be able to bring to you some of the work we're doing and share the floor with Kelly here. I'm a general counsel by background, as Niamh said. I spent 7 or 8 years as a GC. Before that, I spent a year in business, at the same business at Network Rail, the rail infrastructure manager in the UK, and had been in private practice for 7 or 8 years before that. So I've got 20 odd years experience with the industry, and hopefully some of the insights I'll share with you today will chime and resonate with many of you. So that's me. Thank you. Kelly.
Hello, everyone. Great to see you all. I am Kelly Fair. I am a partner at Dentons. I'm headed into my 18th, I guess, rounding the bend to 19th year of practice. I've been in a big firm, but in those 19 years, I spent 4 years as a U.S. General Counsel for Canopy Growth Corporation, a publicly traded Canadian company with a global footprint. Part of my mandate there, which was very broad, was U.S. commercial operations, including market launches, global M&A, U.S. policy, and U.S. stakeholder relations. So I had a very broad mandate that gave me a great group of diverse stakeholders. I earned the coveted moniker of a business-minded attorney along the way. We'll get into that, what that means, and kind of breaking perceptions of what lawyers in-house do, but really employing a lot of the mindset that Dan and I are very aligned is foundational in creating that kind of relationship with the business. So with that, I'll turn it back to Dan to kick us off.
Thanks, Kelly. It's great to see so many people from such a variety of countries as well joining, because what we're going to talk about today, I think, is pervasive. I think it applies anywhere globally, but I'll be really interested as we're talking if people want to share what they're thinking and any questions they have, because so much of what we've done has been focused around the UK, some US and some Middle East. It'll be fascinating to hear, certainly from an O-Shaped perspective, what's happening in your worlds. So we'll talk a little bit about O-Shaped, and we'll focus then on the importance of building relationships, creating value. And let's take a little bit of a look forward as well, because one of the key elements of any commercial focused in-house legal professional has got to have an eye on the future, and thinking about, particularly with generative AI playing more and more of a prominent role, the extent to which now the in-house teams need to be very much comfortable with and take the opportunity with AI. So just in terms of background to O-Shaped, I mentioned in my introduction that I worked in the business part as a commercial program lead for a year before I became general counsel. And it was that really gave me a fundamental understanding of the disconnect between where my team in legal had been and was, and where the business was. There was an obvious chasm between us. The business focused on its objectives, its priorities, and its risks, and the legal function really was quite apart from that and was really working hard, and they were good people, but they weren't necessarily focusing on the right things. And it was quite a shock to be a user of legal services and see just how separate they were from the rest of the organization. And in truth, that led to a really strong perception that lawyers were stereotypical, what people would say about being slow, that they would block things, that they perhaps didn't understand us, they were too risk averse. All of these things came from what I saw being complete misalignment and miscommunication. So when I came back and led the team, I recruited people, hopefully with the aim of being able to embrace the business in a very different way, in a much more human, interactive way. So we would understand their risks, understand what keeps them awake at night, and be able to interact with them in a holistically different way they had. But what I met were lots of people who were technically, legally very capable and were knowledge experts in the law, but had very little in terms of the breadth of capabilities that we were looking for. And what I wanted were people who were well-rounded, hence O-shaped. And that's when we came up with the 5 O's you'll see on the next slide, which broadly for me felt like what I was looking for when I was bringing people into the team. So these were people who are open to new ways of working, open to new ideas, open emotionally. This idea of vulnerability within the profession is rare, but I was really keen with being the human, the person to the table, as well as just simply the technical lawyer. I wanted people who would be innovative and creative, and it would be part of their day job to think differently. So much of what I'd seen had been people thinking very narrowly and specializing very early, which I think, given how many brilliant people and talented people we bring into the profession, was such a waste of that talent to have it focused so narrowly. And I was really keen to be able to bring people in who thought differently. I wanted people who would be looking for opportunities to work in different ways, build their networks, and not be reactive. So much of what I saw and still see with in-house legal functions is firefighting, very reactive. I wanted people that would go out, roll their sleeves up, get their hands dirty, and look for opportunities for us to really get closer to the business. I wanted people that would ultimately take accountability for what we were doing and not simply give advice and stand back. That's the ownership piece, where we would own the outcome and not just be relevant for inputting. So I really wanted people to take responsibility. And finally, it really rubs off on people when you're positive, when you have a really positive can-do attitude. Again, we're very much trained in the legal profession to spot all the things that have gone wrong or could go wrong and all the errors. I wanted people to be looking for things that we could do better and find reasons why we should do things and not identify all those reasons why we shouldn't. So that was kind of my take on the mindset. Kelly, interested in your thoughts on that.
Sure. So it was interesting. I saw this slide cold without, the backdrop of this is how he was approaching building a team. And it very much resonated, all of these O's, with how I ran my practice in-house and how I got to become in a position where I was a true strategic advisor for the C-suite. And it was all of these tenets, and really in this order. Being open and vulnerable with yourself, and employing all of the human skills as an investment with your stakeholders to show them who you are and learn who they are, understand and really actively listen to, what worries them about the business. And we'll get into, those skills. But then along the way, being a problem solver and showing your creativity and how you approach problems gave me more opportunities across the C-suite to solve problems, and really be able to drive an outcome that related back to the business objectives and really creating value in front of the C-suite with that audience. And I think it's really critical along the way that you do employ that optimism. And while you're owning the results, you're going to own good results and you're going to own bad results, and showing the results that aren't exactly ideal as growth opportunities, and solve that problem too. Show how you can keep working the problem to maybe get to a different result. So I saw this cold, it really resonated with me, but for me in my career, I would loop that and make it a wheel, because once you get the wheel going, it really does repeat, and you end up having this real breadth of very interesting work where you're the strategic advisor. By the end of my stint with my in-house piece, my stakeholders included the chief growth officer, the chief commercial officer, the CFO, the CEO, chief comms. Like I had everyone, and was doing the most interesting work. So really, really, these tenets resonated with me, and that's why Dan and I are so aligned.
And I think, Kelly, that what I saw with this, it did gain a lot of attention within the UK in particular. And so what I'd set out, this idea of a mindset, this can-do attitude, what's commonly referred to a growth mindset, people who wanted to improve, be better, gained a lot of attention. And so from that, a small working group then went out and met lots of general counsel in the UK, and we asked them about what they felt made effective lawyers. And they broadly came back with three things. One was knowledge of the law was a given. Not to say it's easy, it's complex, but it was a given, it was expected. Table stakes is the words they used. Secondly, that knowledge of the business was essential for effective lawyers. So that's knowledge of people in the business, knowledge of the industry, whether you're recruiting people in or you're using external firms. Understanding the business is an essential part of the role. And finally, creating value for the business. So that's going the extra mile by saying, yes, we understand you, we know your business. Now it's our responsibility to be able to generate value for your business. That is the role of legal professionals. And I think that takes it much further than historically has been the case. Now, from that, we also distilled it down to the 12 attributes you'll see on this slide. And those 12 attributes fit into those three buckets that we'll focus on a bit more during the course of this session. But broadly, those different attributes, they're not new, right? We're not suggesting for 1 minute that people have not thought of emotional intelligence being important before. This is much more about putting it into a framework that comes from the clients that are saying these are attributes that do distinguish lawyers who are truly outstanding from those who carry on with a very traditional mindset. And when you look at these different attributes, and Kay, I'll come to you now on them, I think many people will display many of them here and there and from time to time. And there's no suggestion that everyone needs to be awesome at all of them. But it seems to me that those who are able to demonstrate capability across those three areas stand a much better chance of differentiating themselves and being better when it comes to client delivery if they've got those talents and attributes. Kelly, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. When I saw this slide about building relationships, like I wanted to flip it. Like if you're building a house, like that was the foundation of, it's been the foundation of my entire career, whether I'm in a firm dealing with clients or in-house, is that investment in building the relationships and knowing your stakeholders, truly knowing them and having them truly know you, and making that investment ended up building the trust that you get to be able to be in a position to be their strategic advisor. And I think that it can be lost along the way because we get focused on doing the legal work, but without that piece of it, I don't think that I would have been as successful in my in-house role doing it, because I wouldn't have truly understood what keeps them up at night. What are their priorities around the business? I would not have, and we'll get to in the next slide, kind of breaking down that building relationships, I wouldn't have had the curiosity to get into each one of the departments, their profession, their vocabulary, their vernaculars, and I don't think I would have been put in such a position to be able to drive the business. So I couldn't agree more. I would definitely say that investment in the green bar is worth it, and then the rest of it flows from that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're right. The next slide has got the kind of some of the different elements that we think are important, the four different aspects that we'll come on to now. I mean, I look at relationships when people talk about commerciality. I think they often miss the fact that being commercial doesn't always just mean having a document you reduce to one page for someone to read. That's useful to know. It used to be the case here in the UK, certainly, that people ask the question of, how can lawyers be more commercial? They used to say to junior lawyers, read the Financial Times, that will make you more commercial. And it's really just so far from the truth. Fine, read about what companies are doing. But the reality is that this is a relationships business. And if you can understand people and how they think and work, that will genuinely help you to start being much more commercially aware and commercially savvy. as good as it is to read some of the journals. The reality for me in relationships then is this position of the in-house team having a unique selling point, the USP, which is about an understanding of the broader part of the business, this helicopter view. And that means that you can piece together the different parts of the business to have this strategic imperative that you can now add to in your role, as opposed to just giving legal advice. Now, that strategic overlook, that's oversight, is a really big commercial advantage that you've got when it comes to delivering your advice. So I'm going to come to perception in a minute, but just before I do, the three other things there, sound obvious, right? Develop the skills that Kelly and I have been talking about, particularly around emotional intelligence, thinking about self-awareness, thinking about empathy, and managing relationships. They're all critical skills to be more effective at this. The curiosity, I think Kelly's done a great job of explaining, just that kind of interest in what other people are doing, rather than it being all about what the lawyers are doing. Reality is, in business, it's much more interesting to find out what people in the business are actually doing, the operational side of it. I used to love hearing from engineers telling me all about what it was they were doing, as opposed to telling them about the law. And then really this bit about in their shoes, what is it they're going through? How can we really put ourselves in their world? And that really helps us give advice. Is someone talking in the background? I don't know whether or not someone needs to go on mute. But what I think, from all of this, bringing it together, we know relationships are critical, but it presents a challenge, I think, for in-house. And I'm going to show you a slide in a second. And the slide that you'll see is a graph that breaks down into horizontally, it's about competence. So lawyers being very competent. And on the vertical, it's warmth. So that's about trust or compassion. And you can see there that the lawyers are in the bottom right, which is really high on competence. So very technically capable. But on the left-hand side there under warmth, vertically, we're really low down. So this idea of trust and of compassion. And this is a survey that was done by two professors at Princeton University in the States. So this data that's come together identifies lawyers as brilliant from technical perspective, but struggle with some of the other capabilities that are required to build effective relationships. And, this is a powerful slide, I think. But Kelly, what's your take on it?
Well, before we get to my take on it, I'll get to, but if we could go back one slide, I just wanted to highlight one point that we may have glossed over. So I just want to underscore this idea that Dan raised, that we as in-house lawyers, we do sit over all of the functions, and just to underscore the importance of building the relationships. And we'll get to value creation, but how this can drive value creation and not just accelerate your own career. It's when you sit over all of these functions, and if you do create relationships with your stakeholders within the functions, you're at the best position to spot inefficiencies in the business, spot redundancies, spot silos that aren't supposed to be there. And so it really does empower the legal department, if you do this, to really have a tangible impact on the business, that you can highlight at the end of the year, that you can show how the department created that value. If you've built the relationship, you are curious, and you do understand when to spot an inefficiency or something like that. So just wanted to highlight that before we moved on. But to the next slide, this chart goes to my intro to talk about that I've been called a business-minded lawyer, as something that's maybe different than the rest of my colleagues. And I think Dan had the same experience, where you're introduced and you're supposed to be flattered because they say, oh, this is Dan, he's a lawyer, but don't worry, he's different. This is Kelly, don't worry, she's different. She's diplomatic. She's going to solve your problem. She's going to get to yes. I heard that a lot. In my career, Kelly will get you to yes. Well, we could all get to yes, if we are employing the right mindset around problem solving. If we've already built the relationships, gotten the trust, we know our stakeholders' priorities, we know their risk tolerance, you can get into a meaty, nasty problem where it would be very easy to close the file and be like, no, that's risk. But if you know your stakeholder and you know your business, you could say, well, there's risk, but here's an approach that we could take. So this chart definitely resonates. I think that we all have the skills, and and certainly the talent to overcome and get a different position on this chart if we do the right mindset.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? This point about this perception. I've always felt it's a challenge. You go into a room of people and they'd stop go, the lawyers in the room, and partly that's kind of fun, and but the reality, it's saying, look, we find you potentially a real blocker, that you've almost got this element of police state around you, and we're not sure whether you're on our side or you're against us. And I think it's really important to break that down and to help people understand that we are on their side. Clearly, we need to make sure we're upholding our responsibilities. But frankly, we do want business to succeed, and we've got to get over that hurdle. But it's interesting. We've talked about these skills being, important to us, but I'm really interested to learn within a relationship business, a people industry, what others are thinking. So we have got a poll. Be interested to get your thoughts, because there's loads of people on this call. And if I can, Niamh, Natalie, hand over to you just to take people through the poll.
Sure. So we're really keen to get everyone's input on this. So thinking about your in-house legal team, how much time do you spend developing people skills? So is it constantly, we feel we're all over people skills development? Maybe it's lots, we focus on people skills at regular intervals. Maybe it's a little, we're often too busy to dedicate the time to developing our people. Or maybe it's none at all. You still feel and you're skeptical that non-technical legal skills are really a waste of time. So it's lovely to see lots of people having a view on this one. We'd love to push up the numbers a little bit more. So if you haven't already indicated a preference, get involved. So let's do a quick countdown. Let's go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great. I still see some votes, so we'll just give it another second or so. Excellent. And we will close the poll and share the results.
Thank you. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that, and maybe not surprising, that we're just too busy to focus on some of these skills. Particularly, we're talking here, Kelly and I, about how fundamental they are in delivering great commercial outcomes. And yet, the majority of people are often too busy to devote time to it. It's interesting because I kind of have this view of the legal profession, this picture of it that I'll try and describe, where you have people, running and riding in a chariot, and the chariot's got square wheels, and they're going really slowly, as you'd expect with square wheels, and then running behind them, chasing, is someone with this beautifully crafted wheel that's perfectly round, screaming for them to stop, but the people at the front in the chariot are saying, no, don't disturb us, we're far too busy, leave us alone. And I think the reality that kind of depicts for me the legal profession so much, that do we have our priorities right? I'm not saying we should constantly be focused on these skills, but we've got to be looking at, I mean, some of you do, which is amazing, by the way, but we've got to recognize that they are at least as important as us doing what we've always considered the day job. And that's why we've not referred to them, Kelly or I, today as soft skills yet. And I hope we don't, because in truth, these are much more important than being regarded as a secondary series of skills. And I like the phrase, whether it's human skills, people skills, someone called them power skills. I think they're essential. So I'm not surprised to see that, but perhaps I leave a little bit disappointed that we're not creating the time, Kelly.
I'm not surprised. And, from my perspective, I have the unique vantage point of having been in a big firm, gone in-house, been a general counsel, now I'm back in a big firm. So I'm trained up in the firm mentality. And what this reminds me of very much is when you're a young associate, and hopefully your firm's training you this young, where you're taught to make the investment in business development skills. And at the time when associates are over inundated with work, busy work, brief work, writing contracts, all of the things, it seems like, well, when am I ever going to do this? Like, I've got deadlines every day, every 5 minutes. And you're trained to make the time, to have the discipline, to carve out the 10 minutes, to write an email, send an article, Look at your Rolodex. You're trained to make the time to go to the conference, to not sit with the people that you know. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you do to get in the muscle memory and the habit, the professional habit of building those business development skills. Because when you're a partner, you're going to be expected to bring in clients and you're going to be expected to generate revenue. So then coming in-house, I didn't have to do that because I had my one client, but I had stakeholders. So I applied the same discipline to my stakeholders. And if there was new hires into the department, to make sure that I got a 15-minute Zoom with them on calendar. I mean, I was in COVID doing all of this, making sure that you had touch points with your people that weren't just work, that you spent time at the beginning of the call to check in with someone's personal life, to see, you know, what might be driving their priorities even that day. So it is extra work, but it pays off. It really does. There's the ROI on making those investments, like, because when your stakeholders need advice or are in trouble or, you know, just need to bounce an idea off of somebody, they're going to go to the people that they trust. The skills are table stakes. Within all of those interactions, you're going to show and shine your creative thinking and all of the other reasons that you're brilliant outside of just your pure legal skills. So they'll come back to you. And that's when you start getting the more interesting work. And that's when you get more visibility to your stakeholders' priorities and the company's business objectives. So I can't say enough that how important that is. I'm not surprised, but I think with an adjustment of mindset, you might find that carving out and sitting down and writing it down at the beginning of the day or the beginning of the week when you're going to do these things, putting it in calendar makes it just part of your routine, and then it's not so burdensome, and it actually is fun.
And it is, and you know, that's it. Put it in your routine. When things become habits, they are after a period of time, they become just natural things to do. And so the more we can make it a habit to start practicing these skills, and I'm in the school of thought that is, these skills do need to be practiced, and you can get better at them in the same way as we can get better in our technical legal knowledge. We can also improve our human or power skills. One of the challenges I see, Kelly, is that some people will say, oh, we've seen those skills before, we already know them, we already do them. I think the reality is probably far from that. And like anything, you can always be better. And that's something I feel we've got to work on.
I feel too that as we get older in our practice, you pick up bad habits. You pick up habits that detract from active listening. So we talk about emotional intelligence. That is kind of sometimes an innocuous term, like, am I going to wake up and I have all the emotional intelligence I'm going to have? Do I not? I don't think that that's true. I think that there are skills that underlie being emotional intelligent. Active listening is key. And I find that some of the bad habits that we get into as lawyers, and we mirror others that do these things, you know, interrupting, waiting to like say your piece and not really listening to what someone is saying. And that alone, just as a tangible, if you're going to have a takeaway, like that skill takes discipline, and it does take work. It takes work to be settled in your saddle, have quiet confidence, and really listen. Be the person that listens so that you can use the information, because information is power. We all know that, and it holds true to the workplace too.
And I think just bringing in, we'll come on to now the value creation bit for those particularly who answered. The few that answered, they don't think that the non-technical skills are important. We'll come much more onto the operational side, which I think recognizes that if we're here to create value, then let's understand a bit more of what that means. So on the next slide, you'll see a few areas where I think, you know, in-house teams can genuinely demonstrate their value. And people have different views on this. I'd love to hear them. But what I'm seeing more and more of, certainly in the UK, is in-house teams being asked to demonstrate the value they are bringing to the organization. Rightly or wrongly, in-house teams are often viewed as a cost center or an overhead, and having to prove that they are of value to their organization. And in one sense, most people I've seen do that by saying, oh, the business really likes us. Oh, they really trust us. So anecdotally, they believe in their own value. And what we're seeing more of is that the C-suite is really looking at the legal function like any other function now and saying, do you know what, you're an expensive team, right? You are highly paid people, certainly compared to your peers around the organization. And frankly, we want to understand what it is you're bringing to this organization. So having to demonstrate and articulate that value is more important than ever. And some of the things we talk about are looking at priorities of people, customers, stakeholders. I think it's critical that we start to understand value from other people's perspective, not value just from the lawyer's perspective, because lawyers thinking around value is often, look how hard we're working, look how many contracts we've done, that demonstrates our value. Well, it doesn't if it's not relevant to what your ultimate stakeholder you're working with needs and their priorities. And it comes right back to what I said when I took over the team. Do we know what their priorities are? And if we say that we fully understand our business, that is our USP, then we've got to understand what the top 3-5 risks are in their particular area. I think the judgment and risk management bit are critical. We get paid for our judgment. We can't simply regurgitate what the law says. We're paid for our judgment as to how tolerant of risk we can be in helping the business achieve its goals. And frankly, that means a very different approach to how we manage and view risk. I think, again, we've been trained to see risk as a really bad thing in the legal industry. The reality is that risk also brings opportunity. By its very definition, it hasn't happened yet. So what's our role within the legal function to be able to help our business colleagues manage risks that they've got, not just the legal risks. I'm talking about business risks here, because we like to go about our legal risks, and aren't we really kind of important because we've got these kind of 3 or 5 risks that if they happen, the whole business would collapse. Well, the reality is we don't. Very rarely are there in any industries where a legal risk will bring the company down. What I think we've got to get much more focused on is how can we use our talents and our skills to help the business make better decisions. The other thing is about, for me, around progress. If we're not making progress as an in-house team, if we're not continuously improving what we're doing to demonstrate our value to the organization, we'll end up going backwards. So I want innovation. Back to this O for originality. I want innovation to be part of the day job, for us to constantly be thinking about, can we do things better? Can we do things faster? Can we do things smarter? And I know, Kelly, there's an example you were sharing about Amazon with me that really speaks to this.
Yeah, so one way, before I get to the Amazon example, one way that I was trained in my in-house position to think about what I was doing and what was my work truly creating value that I could demonstrate to my stakeholders, to the C-suite at the end of the year for whatever reason. And it started with the company's objectives, and a lot of companies have annual objectives that they publish that then trickle down to departments, and then they have their objectives, their scorecards. They're called a host of very different things. And so what we did as a team is we evaluated the work that we were doing to the company's objectives and to the department's objectives. And if the work that we were doing didn't ladder up to move the needle on these objectives or push the ball forward, then we needed to evaluate where was the work coming from and why was it, what was it, what was the purpose of it? Why is this off base of where the company wants to go? So that was the first step. And then qualifying that work. Once we realized it was in scope, it was going to move the company forward, doing the work in a way that we could qualify it either by pace or by size or by novelty. Why did we do this piece of work in a way that actually advanced the ball, whatever your favorite analogy is, so that you could show it, and you weren't just at the end of the year when you needed to demonstrate what you had done to move the company's objectives forward, not having a lot to say. So that was critical, and the discipline that I had and my team had to just really be evaluating the work that you're doing and asking the questions. And if you've done the front work and you've built the relationships, then you can ask the questions about the work and how it's going to be advanced. And then the good example that I heard the general counsel of Amazon speak before a group of U.S. attorney generals, and he came into that role, which had, over 600 attorneys under him, with a mandate to them on pace. He wanted, as one of his objectives, to change the pace of the organization. So to advance work. If work was taking months, decisions were taking months, bring it to weeks. If it's weeks, bring it to days. And he empowered his lawyers to find inefficiencies, find processes that were creating a backlog of decisions that were making policies being stagnant, and just like the company not being able to be as nimble as the company wanted to be. Amazon, as a company objective, wanted to be more nimble. So the general counsel made his lawyers more nimble, empowered them to make decisions without having to go through, 5 levels of approval to get to him. And within that, let them make some judgment calls themselves. And in doing that, Amazon became much more nimble. And going into COVID, you saw the policies that they were able to roll out. They took policy positions on some pretty provocative subjects. They stopped testing their employees for cannabis. They made that decision in a matter of 2 weeks. A company the size of Amazon should have taken about 2 years to make that policy switch. But he, under his mandate, because he wanted his team to go faster, and not an irresponsible way, but in a practical way, and just we rip out the impractical pieces of what they were doing, and it really did make a difference. And so that's that qualitative part where then it's easy for Amazon's C-suite to say that generated a lot of value.
Yeah, I always find it interesting, Kelly, with this. We talk a lot about the better, faster, smarter, about how can we be more efficient as in-house teams. And the legal operations world has clearly grown significantly over the last decade and more. I suppose one of the things I'm still seeing with the work we do with in-house teams and with private practice, but largely in-house teams, there's still a lot of people doing a lot of work that perhaps they don't need to do. Everyone you ask is very busy. They're all likely to get more busy over the next 12 months. And so what's going to give? And so when I ask that question about what's going to give, we get really interesting responses about, well, look, everything we do is really important. So the way I've kind of tried to put value together is by perhaps an example I'll give you, that my experience in Network Rail. And there was an example, and you'll see it on the next slide, and it'll bring in this pretty awful situation here where you've got a lorry under a bridge, which is not a great position, and this bridge gets hit a lot, and the railway is running over that bridge. And you can see just on this occasion, that's the 120th time that gets hit. Now, this is something that happens regularly, daily, in fact, more than once a day. So what we're seeing is a regularity of things that clearly cause all sorts of problems for our end users, our customers, the people who use the railway. They get delayed because the bridge has to get closed, because it needs to be inspected in case it's damaged by that lorry that struck it. Now, one would argue here that if I'm responsible for the bridge, as we are at Network Rail, we're going to take action here. We're going to sue people. We're going to be able to have to defend ourselves against the companies that can't use the railway that are paying us. There's a whole myriad of legal issues here that we could get stuck into, and we could do it 2,000 times a year because that's how often it happens. But the reality is that adds very little value to the business. What the business is clearly looking to do is to stop it happening. And they're asking the question that not enough legal teams are asking about a business issue. Why is this happening? Now, when it comes to stop it happening, why is it the preserve of every other function in the organization operationally to start to play a role in understanding why this is happening and what we can do about it? Why is it that the legal function cannot play more of a leading role in addressing genuine business problems? Because, of course, this has a legal element to it. And, of course, we could make the case of just how important we are because we've got 2,000 claims we're dealing with. But the reality is that the business, frankly, doesn't care too much about those claims. They care about the bigger picture. And I really want people from this talk to always be asking that question. Why is it happening? As opposed to, we've got loads of legal work we can now do and throw at you, business. Now, here, we ended up taking a leading role, bringing together different departments and finding different solutions that we could potentially put forward to reduce the number of times this is happening. So I think the legal function can play a leading role. It does then make you think about what is value? Is value the kind of thing I'm describing here? Or is value churning out lots of work every day because the business is creating it? And I'm really interested in firstly, I suppose, Kelly, your reflection on this, and then we'll come to the group to ask a question as another poll.
Well, it's the difference, I think, between, you know, the perception slide we showed where, you know, lawyers are over in this island off to themselves, being lawyers, or are they problem solvers? And here the business is asking for the lawyers to be problem solvers. And from my perspective, the lawyers should always be the problem solvers. It is easier and tidier to say no, and no, there's risk here, and close the file and go home. But that's not what is going to create that value, and that's not what the business wants. They want an assessment of risk. They want to know what some possible solutions are against that assessment of risk. And again, going back to that foundation of building your relationships, you're going to know what your stakeholders' risk tolerance, you're going to know what that risk tolerance is in the broader scope of your company's risk tolerance on a particular issue, and then be able to collaborate amongst your team, because you have those relationships too, to get some diverse thought at a problem, and then be able to present some creative solution and do it in a way that you know that your business stakeholder is going to identify with a nice executive summary. And here's a possible solution, and here's the risk around it, and here's a recommendation against that risk. So it takes more time. I'll tell you, it's a whole lot more fun than just toiling away and just, you know, pontificating on the state of the law or the state of, you know, the risk. So it really just, this example highlights for me the split in the road. You know, you want to be the lawyer, or do you want to be the problem solver?
Yeah, and a lot of people say to me with this is, well, our role isn't to advise on the commercial side of it. And I don't think this is advising on the commercials. I think this is simply offering a view as an intelligent person as to what can we do to solve a problem. And I think that's very different from giving commercial advice, which many people would say, and I understand they're not there to do. But I think this is very different, and this is a zone we should be playing in without doubt, in my view. But I'm interested in what others think. So I think we've got another poll, and over to you then, Niamh, just to take people through it.
Okay, so this is the second time we've run this session. We had some really interesting and honest results last night when we did this. So very keen to hear what everybody thinks. So how much value do you feel you've contributed to your business in the last 2 weeks? Do you feel that everything you do adds value to the business? Most of your work adds value to the business? Maybe you're not really sure how much value your work adds, or you might feel actually very little of what we currently do adds value. So again, great to see lots of participation on this one. So we'll do our normal countdown. So let's go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. On this one, there's still lots of votes coming in. So we'll just leave it for 2 seconds and we will end the poll and share the results.
Thanks, Niamh. I mean, it's interesting, you know, like all of this, what I see from this, let's just leave aside for a minute that 1 in 5 are of the view, and that's fine, that everything I do adds value. That 80% of people pretty much are in the space where we can do other things that would be more valuable. And so when everyone will say that we're really busy in-house, we're at capacity, well, 4 out of 5 are saying, actually, we don't think everything we're doing is adding value. Right, we know most of it is, or I'm not really sure. But what we can see here is that more people aren't sure than know that everything is adding value. So I think here we've got an example of let's look a bit closer at what we're doing. Let's try and understand a bit more about day to day, even, dare I say, hour to hour, what we're spending our time on, what's coming into our team, and where is our time going. Because if we're not sure which bits, and we're certainly sure that most of it is, but not all of it is, we need to stop we need to stop doing the work that isn't creating value. And if we know what it is, great, let's stop it. If we're not sure what it is, let's find out, then stop it. Kelly, what's your take?
Just like last night, I really focused on the I'm not sure my work adds value. And I think there's some solves for that kind of at every level. I was very fortunate to be really at the tip of the spear for strategy, so I could really see how my contributions did move the needle. But I also have seen others in in-house experience where they just don't have the visibility. The organization's very large, the company's very large, there are silos by design. And so for that, I think that solved to it is very much similar to being in a big firm, a mentoring situation where you can have someone who's above you that's a mentor and even potentially turns into a sponsor that can give you that visibility. And if you've built the relationships, you should be able to have those discussions of, okay, I'm doing this piece of work, I'm doing this contract, and I want to understand where it's going to go. I want to understand how it's going to be used. I want to understand the commercial results. And if you don't have the direct tie to the stakeholder in the other department, or maybe you do at your level, being able to follow and map that work and map the work that you're doing so you can see what the end result is. And even further than that, what are the commercial metrics coming out of whatever it is. So it takes a bit of effort, but it's the same effort we were talking about, that investment in the relationships, seeking out a mentor if you don't have one, and just the end goal being get visibility into how your work is laddering up to the company objectives.
Yeah, and I it's interesting because I brought in for a while, we didn't use the term time recording, but we used it as a kind of activity analysis. We wanted to understand what people were doing just so we could then try and filter out the work that wasn't genuinely going towards the priorities of the organization. But it's a very sensitive topic in-house to be talking about time recording, because most people still have, if you've been through a private practice beforehand, which probably the majority of in-house lawyers have at some point, then you will still have a chip on your shoulder about time recording. And so we were very sensitive to that, but recognize if we don't understand what people are doing, how do we know that everything is adding value? So those who said all the way through, like, everything we do is adding value, I would ask you just to think about for a week or a month, just start writing down what you're doing, and then come back to that question a month later and say, is it right that everything I'm doing is adding value? I don't know whether or not that's something you've experienced, Kelly, yourself, activity analysis, time recording.
Yes. So I too was allergic to time recording coming out of the firm. Now I'm back in the mix, but I went through an exercise. We called it keeping a diary. It was a more gentle phrase to use, because I had a lawyer on my team that he was my right hand on M&A, on deals, and he didn't have any time to do any deal work, and it was frustrating to him that he just didn't have the bandwidth. And so I said, well, what are you doing? And he was also, part of his mandate was pretty broad too, and he had to do continuous disclosures and he had to work with the tax team. And so I asked him for 2 weeks to do a diary of what he was doing, and it turns out he was getting inundated with questions from the tax team that probably could have been handled by a paralegal or a clerk. And so we were able to shift that work away, get him focused on where his true skills lie, and get him more engaged. And he's still happily with the company, like doing big deal work. So I think the exercise was very fruitful for him. And it's also just as part of that routine and habit, like writing down your intentions, writing down, the time you're going to take to have touches with your stakeholders, also writing down kind of what's on your plate. And if you've got the company's objectives or scorecard or whatever it's called, having that also on your desk to see like how what you're doing ladders up to those objectives, and then being able to quantify it and qualify it. And then you have like a piece of work product that you can, in a moment's notice, be demonstrative to the value you're adding. Unsolicited advice.
It's a great example, though. It's a great example that can be transformational for people. That if you've got people that we've brought in with really good experience, that we're not giving them work that frankly is where their skill set lies, where their interest lies, they'll get bored and move on, right? So it's not just about being more sensible about adding value. It's about also giving people meaning in their work and ensuring that we're doing the right work. And I think that, again, demonstrates the real commercial approach to giving our advice. I want to just take us on to the last area, if I may, just on a future look. I'm conscious that we're coming towards the end, and I'm not sure if there are questions coming in. Neve will no doubt tell us, but we'll spend a couple of minutes on this, and if there are any questions, Kelly and I will no doubt be happy to answer them as we go through. But we can't not mention, when we look at adaptability, what's happening in the digitalization, not just, of course, of the legal profession. In fact, the legal profession is trying to get a grip on it and is traditionally quite far behind the movements. But I think on this occasion is recognizing that because the wider reports have suggested that the legal industry is more susceptible potentially than any other industry to being disrupted by AI. There was a Goldman Sachs report that said 44% of tasks could be automated within the legal industry. That Deloitte's report highlighted an AI provider, so perhaps they're coming with laced with a bit of bias, but was saying that within 5 years, they reckon that the average lawyer's job could be done by AI, and that in a year, a paralegal's role could be done by AI. So it's clearly there is a real movement for change, and it's going to happen, and there's an inevitability about it. But the quote that's there from the IBM report about needing to embrace AI feels to me like a role that legal professionals can now be taking on to learn more about it. Back to our word about be curious. No one at the moment, as far as I can tell, is truly expert that I've met on what's going to happen. We don't have a crystal ball, but I feel that the right thing to do is to be curious, to listen, to understand what's out there, and to think about everything we do every day. If we want it to be better and smarter and faster, what's the role that generative AI can do in that? Some teams I know are already using it as part of a chatbot where they've created their own large language model, which is essentially just a load of material they've brought together. And they've worked with a company to create an algorithm that allows them to answer questions from the business. And it's much more predictive because of the questions that are being asked. Now, that requires, I think, a very progressive mindset to risk, an approach to risk. But I sense that that's probably the direction of travel for many in-house teams. But Kelly, what are you hearing about this?
So this is going to be from the Dentons perspective, and I'm not surprised because Dentons is such an innovative firm. They are already ahead of it and using the tools and rolling the tools out to us as lawyers to then be able to demonstrate to clients how we're using the tools to be more efficient, if it makes sense for the client. So I think that is a smart approach to, not bury our heads in the sand, but rather be the ones that are ahead of it, curious about it, looking at the tools, evaluating the tools, and demonstrating to the business that, legal is coupling with these tools, or we are figuring it out, so that if the tools end up being a great thing, drive efficiency, drive pace, whatever it is, that the law department gets to own that win and own that result as part of the value creation proposition. So I think that's probably the better approach than just to, want to keep it at arm's length because it presents risk to talent.
Yeah, and a lot of people I hear now say, let's sit back and wait to see what happens. I think the reality is it's happening so quickly, unless you're doing what you describe and Dentons are doing. And, I've seen that firsthand now, having worked closely with Dentons over the last few months. I think you've got to be making inroads here and not just simply waiting to be done to. But we've got something, I think, for, again, a final poll, just to see where other people are at in this, because Kelly, you and I have got a view, but I'm sure that many other people on the call have. So Neve, over to you.
So our last poll of the day, we're really keen to understand how you feel about the potential impact of generative AI on your team. So would you say you're really excited, that you feel it's a game changer and that it's going to help do our jobs better? Maybe you're very interested and you can see some potential. You might still be in the skeptical bucket, so you just feel that technology cannot do our jobs. Or maybe you're feeling threatened and you're concerned that, in fact, it may actually replace us. So again, we'd love to see what everybody thinks of this one. So some good engagement as always so far. Let's do our little countdown. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 on this one. 2 seconds for any last minute votes. Excellent. And we'll end the poll and share results.
Yeah, and again with this one, thank you. Neve, look, I think it's great that we can see mostly 78% of people are either really excited or very interested. The other thing I would say here with the very interested is to take some proactive steps, to ask the questions, to be curious, to read the material out there, because I think, look, the reality is that there is going to be an impact. The extent to which that impact impacts our profession is unknown, although many think it's going to be significant. But I'd rather be leading this and on it, as opposed to just simply sitting back and feel that we're being done to. But again, look, nearly a quarter of people are either skeptical or threatened by it. So we've got to recognize there's a real divergence of view with this. And unless we're treating everyone with, I think, their own personal approach to this and being very, back to our point about emotionally intelligent about how people are feeling about this, then we may well risk losing or alienating people. So not surprising, but I just really urge people to be really curious about it. Kelly?
I think that just being curious, being interested, and if the legal department is ahead of it and has a good grasp on where it is and where its people are, then you can control the narrative. You can present it in a way that does protect your people, that does protect your job. What can AI do versus what it cannot do? What are the parts where you have to have a human touch? So I think that just, again, not burying our heads, not having it done to us, as Dan says very well, is the better approach. We don't know where it's going to land. We don't know exactly all of the capabilities quite yet, but being able to control the narrative to our business and being able to be the experts, again, the ones that they look to ask the questions, like, should I be, even as other chatbots and other FAQs are being run by bots, should I be using that? Should I be going to the regulator's website? Because I know that, at least in the US, a lot of regulatory agencies at the state level are considering using AI to answer their questions. Do I just go to that site versus coming to in-house? Like, things like that. The lawyers need to be very well equipped to talk about the benefits and also the risks and downsides of using the tools.
Perfect. So I think, thank you, Kelly. Neve, we're back to you, because I'm not sure there have been many or any questions coming in. Hopefully we've given people information to think about, and it'd be very interesting to hear from people in the future if that's an option. But back to you, Neve.
The audience have been very kind to you both today. So we had lots of challenging questions in the first session, so I feel you're getting away very lightly today. I want to say a huge thanks to everyone for joining us today and for really jumping into the session and getting involved. I also want to say a massive thank you to Kelly and Dan for the time, thought and consideration they put into today's session. We have lots of sessions coming up, as you know, on the programme, so we're looking forward to seeing you all back online soon. Thank you for joining us today, and that concludes today's session.